2,000 people, they convert to Islam in Medina. And then the next day, what do? They all decide to abandon Islam. This could weaken the morale of the believers. So there were individuals who were enemies of Islam, and their conversion was simply to sow division and cause fitna among the believers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions them. وَإِذَا لَقُوا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قَالُوا آمَنَّا. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says that when they meet the believers, they say, we believe, we're one of you. وَإِذَا خَلَوْا إِلَى شَيَاطِينِهِمْ قَالُوا إِنَّا مَعَكُمْ. When they meet with shayateen, and shayateen can be jinn and human beings. There are some humans who are devilish. When they meet with shayateen, they say what? إِنَّا مَعَكُمْ إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُسْتَهْزِئُونَ. We were just mocking the believers. We're really with you. So this is one category of munafiqeen. Now, the majority of the munafiqeen are from the second category, which we're going to speak about tonight. And that is, there are some people who embraced Islam because they were genuinely attracted to the message. There was something about Islam that resonated with them. Its advocacy for racial equality, its emphasis on economic justice, its rejection of idol worship. There was something that attracted them. But what happened? They gradually started to lose their conviction. They embraced Islam, but they were not able to build their faith, to cultivate their faith. So gradually, they started to lose their Iman because of the things that they used to do. The disease of hypocrisy started to grow in their hearts. Now, we mentioned that hypocrisy, nifaq, is a disease. And like any disease, it can grow. It can get worse. It can become more advanced. Now the question is, does the Quran speak to us about the levels of nifaq? Because nifaq has degrees. You have a full-fledged munafiq who is very advanced in their nifaq, and then you might have someone who has some of the seeds of nifaq. So when we speak about nifaq, nifaq is not just one level. In the same way that faith has different levels. If you look at the Quran, you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us descriptions of various levels of nifaq. And we have to be very careful as mu'mineen that we do not allow the seed of nifaq to grow in us without us realizing it. When we start to identify the various levels of nifaq, we can become more vigilant and proactive, and we can uproot nifaq from our hearts before it takes control, before it takes root. Now, when you look at the Quran, what you find is that one of the lowest level of nifaq, we'll begin there. What is the first sign of nifaq? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, and this is a discussion that some of our ulama have had, they say that the first seed of nifaq is when your resolve as a mu'min is weakened. What does this mean? You see, as we said, there are people who embrace Islam. You know, sometimes there's something about the message that excites them, that attracts them. But there are many people, they have this idea that when I become religious, my life should become easier. My life should be smooth. So there is this wrong perception that the closer I become to God, the less problems I should have in my life. Their resolve is weakened. They don't want to be tested. This is the first seed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He alludes to this. أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ, the beginning of Surah Al-Ankabut. أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون? Do the people think that they will just claim to have faith without Allah trying them, without Allah testing them? So the first level of nifaq is what? That when you become a person who thinks that religion is enough to just proclaim, that religion should not inconvenience my life. This is the first level, where my religiosity, my devotion to God, should not create any sort of inconvenience in my life. It shouldn't demand any type of sacrifice. Allah, He calls out this level of nifaq. أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم. How could you have this idea? Don't you see that we have tried those who came before you? فلا يعلمن الله الذين صدقوا ولا يعلمن الكاذبين. Allah needs to expose, He needs to distinguish the true believer from the false believer. This is one level of nifaq. Now, if this level of nifaq, if it goes untreated, and inshallah tomorrow night we'll speak about some of the practical things that we can do to eradicate hypocrisy from our hearts. The first level of nifaq is weak resolve, an expectation that I am religious, I am mu'min, and God should not test me or try me or put my faith to the test. The second level of nifaq, when you have a disease and you don't treat it, what happens? It gets worse. It gets more severe. What is the second degree of nifaq? The second degree of hypocrisy is when you develop a resentment towards some of the teachings of Islam. You start to see some aspects of the religion as what? Restrictive. There's a resentment for some of the laws of Islam. For example, there might be, and this is not something that necessarily needs to be uttered, in your heart, you find that some of the laws of Islam are limiting my freedom, limiting my ability to succeed and achieve. For example, the prohibition of shaking hands with the opposite gender. You have some resentment towards this ruling. The obligation of donning the hijab. You might not say it, but in your heart, you feel that religion is restricting me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say about the majority of people when they think about religion? A lot of people, they have this attitude. لَقَدْ جِئْنَاكُمْ بِالْحَقِّ. Surah 48, Ayah 78. لَقَدْ جِئْنَاكُمْ بِالْحَقِّ. We have brought to you the truth. وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَكُمْ لِلْحَقِّ كَارِهُونَ. But unfortunately, the majority of people, they do not like the truth. Because the truth is not always sweet. The truth requires what? It requires sacrifice. The truth is bitter sometimes. In the same way that sometimes medicine is bitter, medicine is good for you. You need it, but it's bitter. Some of the laws of Islam, they might be bitter, but they're necessary. They're good for you. The second degree of nifaq is what? To have resentment towards the truth, to some of the teachings of the religion. Now, when you have this, if you have a resentment towards a certain Islamic teaching, what you should do is maybe humble yourself to try to understand the wisdom, to research deeply to understand why did God legislate this. And if you are not able to find the answer, remind yourself that who legislated this law? Allah Azza wa Jal, the all-knowing. So just because it might inconvenience you, it doesn't mean that it's not good for you. We're ignorant of many things that are beneficial to us. So this is the second level of nifaq, resentment. This idea that religion is restrictive. Now, if this goes untreated, what happens? The disease of hypocrisy, it grows. nifaq begins to fester. The third level of nifaq is what? When you reach a point where you only practice Islam in public. You only practice, you observe the laws of Allah only when there's an audience, only when someone is watching you. You come to the masjid, it's salah time, you'll stand and pray. But at home, God forbid, maybe you don't pray. You'll participate in religious rituals when there's an audience, when it's in public. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He describes this mindset, this level of nifaq in Surah An-Nisa, ayah 142, وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ When they stand for prayer, what happens to these people? قَامُوا كُسَالَى Allah describes the hypocrites. He says when they stand for prayer, when it's the time of salah, they don't yearn for prayer. They don't see prayer as an honor or as a privilege. They get up for prayer lazily. They're lazy about it. يُرَاءُونَ النَّاسِ They pray so that they can show off. They pray to show people that they pray. They pray to show off. وَلَا يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا But in reality, they don't remember God. When they're alone, when there's no audience, there's no mindfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So religion becomes what? Religiosity becomes performative. It becomes an act. You're only religious in public. You only do tasbih when you come to the Husayniyah, when you come to the masjid. At home, there's no tasbih. When you have an audience in qunut, you recite the best dua. At home, qunut is mustahab. You skip qunut. When you recite Quran in salah, you sound like Abdul Basit when it's public. At home, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, you finish the entire salah in 2 minutes. This is what? This is a sign of nifaq. This means that there is a degree of nifaq in your heart because you only practice when you have an audience, when you're in public. And then another level of nifaq, the fourth level of nifaq, is that you start to swear using false oaths. You bring the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because now you want to emphasize this idea that I'm religious, and you're willing to even lie in the name of God about how religious you are, how faithful you are. So they don't hesitate to swear false oaths. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah At-Tawbah, Surah 9, Ayah 95, سَيَحْلِفُونَ بِاللَّهِ لَكُمْ Allah describes the hypocrites. They will swear by God's name to you because they feel they want to compensate for their lack of Iman by doing what? By doing qasam, by using the name of God, by mentioning these slogans. سَيَحْلِفُونَ بِاللَّهِ لَكُمْ إِذَا انْقَلَبْتُمْ إِلَيْهِمْ لِتُعْرَضُوا عَنْهُمْ They'll swear in the name of Allah that they're religious, they're pious, just so you can get off of their back. This can even happen in our homes. Your parents ask you, did you do your salah? Wallahi, I prayed. You didn't pray. But you invoke the name of Allah just to silence anyone who might criticize you. This is a sign of nifaq. Because what does this mean? It means that you are more concerned about people's opinion of you than God's opinion of you. This is a level of hypocrisy. And then what happens? The disease begins to grow even more. And then you come to the next level of nifaq, which is what? You begin to actually ridicule the teachings of Islam. You see, in the earlier stages of nifaq, you saw religion as restrictive. There was frustration. But now, no, now it's ridiculing, making fun of the teachings of Islam, ridiculing the faith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions this attitude in the Quran, in Surah At-Tawbah, ayah 124. وَإِذَا مَا أُنزِلَتْ سُورَةٌ, when a surah of the Quran is revealed, a surah that has ayat, that has reminders, that has admonishments, what is the reaction of the munafiqeen? فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَقُولُ أَيُّكُمْ زَادَتْهُ هَذِهِ إِيمَانًا. Which one of you, the munafiqeen will say when the ayat are being revealed, which one of you has had their faith increased? Meaning that they belittle these ayat. They make a mockery of the faith. And if you look at some of the teachings of Islam, an example, you might have someone who says, why is it that we can't eat meat that is slaughtered by a non-Muslim? What's the difference? You mean to tell me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to punish me if I eat a Big Mac? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's going to send me to the hellfire because 3 strands of my hair are showing? When we use this language, what are we saying? We're making a mockery of the religion. It's not about the 3 hair strands or the burger. It's about respecting the law of God. And people who use this logic, what I say to them is that when you apply for a job and you fill out the application, and let's say that you missed the part where you have to fill out your name. It's like someone fills out the entire application, but you didn't put your first name and your last name. And you say, you're telling me that I filled out the entire application, and just because I didn't write my first name and my last name, my application is rejected? Yes. Because applications have rules. It's not just about your name, it's about respecting the process. The same logic applies. It's not about the smallness of the issue, it's about whether you observe the boundaries of Allah or you don't. So this level of nifaq is when you start to make a mockery of the faith. And then the most serious level of nifaq is when you develop outright animosity towards Islam and the Muslims, whereby now it's not just an individual problem. Now you look at other believers with enmity, and you start to plot and strategize against them, where now you're actually trying to derail others from the path of God. And we spoke about people who are like this. Now, if you look at some of the other Quranic descriptions, it's amazing how much the Quran speaks about munafiqeen. One of the qualities of the munafiqeen is that when it comes to religion, they only want religion to be something that is on the tongue. If you look at, for example, Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah number 8, the hallmark of the munafiq is that they do a lot of talking and there's very little action. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say? وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَقُولُ, and from among the people are those who are always saying, آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَبِالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. The munafiq is always saying that they believe in God and the final day. They're always talking. But this belief in Allah and in the final day, it's not reflected in their actions. It's just on their tongues. Religion has become what? Just a collection of slogans. This is exactly the description that Imam al-Hussein salawatullahi alayhi gave. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When you think about what happened to Imam al-Hussein and his companions, I'm sure all of us wonder, you have all of these Muslims, all of these people who pray, all of these people who supposedly practice the religion, how come they didn't support Imam al-Hussein? Where was everybody? And Imam al-Hussein, he answers. He says, الناس عبيد الدنيا. Imam, what does he say? He says, people, they're slaves of this dunya. So where does religion come to play? What role does religion have in their lives? وَالدِّينُ لَعِقٌ عَلَىٰ أَلْسِنَتِهِمْ. And religion is just something that, it's like a lick on their tongues. That's it. People just like to just taste religion, just a little taste. They don't want to actually consume it and make it a part of themselves. Just a little lick, that's it. وَالدِّينُ لَعِقٌ عَلَىٰ أَلْسِنَتِهِمْ فَإِذَا مُحِّصُوا بِالْبَلَاءِ قَلَّ الدَّيَّانُونَ. The moment they're tested, the moment I have to actually make sacrifices, no, I'm not willing to inconvenience myself in the least. Islam is just like an accessory. I like to carry it around, but the moment the bag is a little too heavy, I'll drop it. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's description of munafiqeen. For them, it's just religion is just talk. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He also says that another quality of the munafiqeen is what? They're deceptive. They're manipulative. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah 9, in Surah Al-Baqarah verse 9, what does He say about the quality, the characteristics of the hypocrites? He says, يُخَادِعُونَ اللَّهَ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَمَا يَخْدَعُونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ. The munafiq has this intellectual arrogance. They try to deceive God and the believers. They look at religious people as just a bunch of simpletons. Naive, that I am so smart that I can outmaneuver these naive believers. I'll give you a real life example. Sometimes you have someone, he wants to marry a Muslim girl and he's not Muslim. So he wants to convert. And I love when these guys, they come to me especially. Why do you want to convert? I said, forget the girl. There's no girl. Why do you want to convert? Oftentimes they don't have an answer. I'm interested in the religion. Okay, what interests you about the religion? You realize that you have to wake up at dawn? 1 month, you can't eat and drink when the sun is out. It requires that. What is so attractive to you about this religion? Because if you're converting to Islam because you want to marry the girl, you'll divorce Islam when you divorce the girl. You think that religion is a game? That I'm just going to say I'm Muslim just so I can marry the girl. You're trying to fool Allah. You're trying to fool God. So a munafiq is someone who has this deceptive nature, manipulative. They have this idea that I'm smarter than everybody. Everyone is a fool and I can outmaneuver them. This is a quality of a munafiq. They're not honest. They're deceptive. They're manipulative. Another quality of the munafiqeen is that they are exclusivists. It's very interesting. If you look at Surah Al-Munafiqun, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions one of the things that Abdullah ibn Ubay, he said. And as we mentioned last night, Abdullah ibn Ubay was the most notorious munafiq in the lifetime of the Prophet. He was supposed to be the king of Yathrib before the Hijrah. Rasulullah arrives and he's demoted for life. He had a grudge. In the battle of Bani Mustaliq, one of the battles of Islam in the 5th year after the Hijrah, the Muslims went out. Without going into too much detail, a fight broke out between the Muhajirin and the Ansar. Who are the Muhajirin? The Muhajirin are those Muslims who left their homes and they settled in Medina. They were basically like the refugee population. The Ansar are who? They are the residents of Medina. Abdullah ibn Ubay, he's from the Ansar. So he used to look down on these refugees, if we want to use that term. So what does he say? The moment there is a clash, a conflict between the Muhajirin and the Ansar, what does Abdullah ibn Ubay do? This munafiq, look at what he says in ayah number 8 of Surah Al-Munafiqun. يقولون لئن رجعنا إلى المدينة ليخرجن الأعز منها الأذل. He says, when we go back to Medina, we're going to kick out the low-class people. Meaning that these muhajirin, these refugees, we're going to kick them all out of Medina, and Medina is only going to be a place that houses sophisticated people, like the Ansar. So the quality of the Munafiq is that a Munafiq is not inclusive. A Munafiq wants to treat religion as if it's a country club, that it's only for my people. So if you and I, if we are exclusivists, if we try to push other mu'mineen out, if we're not welcoming, if we want to treat the religion as if it's a private club, that means what? That means this is one of the seeds of nifaq. This is one of the seeds of hypocrisy. Another quality of munafiqeen that we find in the Quran is that the munafiq is terrified of death. Terrified of death. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nisa, ayah 77. فَلَمَّا كُتِبَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقِتَالِ. When fighting was prescribed for them. You know, some of these guys, they thought, okay, we'll become Muslim. We just have to pretend to pray and maybe, fast. But now they have to go and fight. They have to go to the battlefields. فَلَمَّا كُتِبَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقِتَالِ. When fighting became prescribed upon them, إِذَا فَرِيقٌ مِّنْهُمْ يَخْشَوْنَ النَّاسَ كَخَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ أَوْ أَشَدَّ خَشْيَةً. When the Prophet tells the residents of Medina, especially the men, okay, we have to mobilize, we have to go fight this army, the munafiqeen. They are more afraid of the men that they're going to be fighting in the battlefield. They're more afraid of the men than they are of God. They're terrified of death. Why? Because they don't have real faith. One of the signs of Iman is that a mu'min should see death as actually a positive experience. Because death is returning to who? Returning to Allah, returning to the one who's the most merciful. So having this irrational fear of death, this is one of the signs of the munafiqeen. Another quality of the munafiqeen is that they are colluding and they form alliances with the enemies of Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these secret alliances, they're treacherous. In Surah 47, ayah 26, what does Allah say? ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ, speaking about the hypocrites. قَالُوا لِلَّذِينَ كَرِهُوا مَا نَزَّلَ اللَّهِ. These munafiqeen, they go to the people who despise what God has revealed. They go to the disbelievers, the enemies of Islam. What do they say? سَنُطِيعُكُمْ فِي بَعْضِ الْأَمْرِ. We will obey you when it comes to certain matters. Meaning that they have one foot on the side of the enemies of Islam and one foot with the mu'mineen. They're trying to play both sides. They have these backdoor deals. And if you think this doesn't happen today, it happens today. You might have someone that comes to the masjid pretending to be a mu'min and they're working for some, agency, spying on mu'mineen, collecting information. People are like that. This is a sign of nifaq, to surveillance your own community, to act as an informant. This happened during the time of the Prophet. It happens today. You might have someone who comes, Salatul Jumu'ah, praying, but what? He's a spy. He's a mole. They have these secret alliances. And of course, we mentioned this idea of being lazy in worship. Now, there are many, many descriptions, but what I want to mention very briefly is, how are we supposed to deal and interact with munafiqeen? Because Allah, what does He say to the Prophet? Jahid al-kuffar wal-munafiqeen. Ya ayyuhan nabi, jahid al-kuffar wal-munafiqeen. Strive against them. Neutralize their influence. Now, if you identify someone, if someone has some of the qualities of a munafiq, what are you supposed to do? The brother said, run away. Amir al-Mu'mineen, in his wasiyah to Kumail, He actually gives him advice on how to deal with someone. And of course, we have to be very careful. We can't be quick to just label this person as munafiq, or someone is yawning in salah, he's a munafiq. وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالَى. We have to be careful. We have to make 70 excuses before we assign these labels to people. As I said, these ayat are more about evaluating ourselves. But let's say that there's someone whose nifaq has been established. What do? Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says to Kumail. And Kumail, he was one of those very fortunate companions who used to get a private audience with Amir al-Mu'mineen. Imam used to speak to him privately, intimately. He used to give him very valuable advice. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, Ya Kumail, O Kumail, جانب المنافقين ولا تصاحب الخائنين. He says, O Kumail, avoid the company of the hypocrites. If you can avoid them, that is best. Notice the Imam doesn't say confront them, fight them, clash with them, because they're munafiqeen. In the eyes of many, they're mu'min. If you fight against them, you're going to damage your own reputation. So the Imam says, avoid them. You see, a mu'min has to conserve his energy. Your energy, your time is limited. You should be very selective about how you use your time and energy. Ahlul Bayt don't want us to pick a fight with everybody. As the saying goes, you don't need to die on every hill. Imam says, Janib al-munafiqin. Avoid them. Someone is munafiq, keep your distance. وَلَا تُصَاحِبِ الْخَائِنِينَ. Do not befriend, do not take as a companion someone who is kha'in, someone who is treacherous. Because if this person has betrayed others, your day is going to come. He's going to also betray you one day. And then what does the Imam say? He says, Ya Kumail, إياك والتطرق إلى أبواب الظالمين. Imam, he says, beware of approaching the doors of the oppressors. You should not be knocking on the doors of zalimin. And this is something that should make us appreciate our own ulama. If you look at our maraja, you look at Sayeda Sistani, our maraja, you don't find them knocking on the doors of this president and this prime minister and this king. It's the opposite. The kings and the presidents and the prime ministers, they're dying to get a meeting with our ulama. What does that tell you? Alhamdulillah, we're under the guidance of righteous scholars. So the Imam says, Ya Kumail, iyaka wa tatarruqa ila abwab al-zalimin. Beware of approaching the doors of the oppressors. وَالْإِخْتِلَاطَ بِهِمْ. Do not mix with them, because you'll make yourself complicit. وَالْإِكْتِسَابِ مِنْهُمْ. Do not earn a living by helping them. Do not acquire money from them. وَإِيَّاكَ أَن تُطِيعَهُمْ. And beware of obeying them. Do not be a pawn in the games of zalimin. Don't volunteer your time and your service to them. وَأَن تَشْهَدَ فِي مَجَالِسِهِمْ. Do not even attend the gatherings of the oppressors and the tyrants. Because sometimes your presence can be used to legitimize them. Do not give them their photo ops. Do not attend their gatherings. بِمَا يُسْخِطُ اللَّهَ عَلَيْكَ. Because this would incur the wrath of Allah. You should not be strengthening the institutions of dhulm. And then he says, and this is what I want you to pay attention to. يَا كُمَيْلْ إِذَا اضْطُرِرْتَ إِلَىٰ حُضُورِهِمْ. Sometimes you might not have a choice. Sometimes you are forced to be in the company of a zalim. Sometimes you are compelled and coerced into being in the presence of a munafiq. What do? Because sometimes you don't have the option. Sometimes circumstances, the situation forces you to sit with a zalim, to sit with a hypocrite. What should you do? What does Amir al-Mu'mineen say? فَدَاوِمْ ذِكْرَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى وَالتَّوَكُّلْ عَلَيْهِ. When you're in the presence of a zalim, when you're in the presence of a hypocrite, a munafiq, you're sitting with people who have diseases in their hearts. So Amir al-Mu'mineen, what does he say? The best way to immunize yourself so that you do not catch that disease is to constantly remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This will protect you. And then what does the Imam alayhi salam say? He says, وَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ شَرِّهِمْ. This is the moment where to yourself, where you should say, أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. You should isti'adha, seek refuge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a dua. You're asking Allah for His protection from the evil plots and the scheming of these people. وَاتْرُكْ عَنْهُمْ. And even if you're in their gathering, try to avoid them. Don't engage them directly. Try to be as aloof as possible in that gathering. وَأَنْكِرْ بِقَلْبِكَ فِعْلَهُمْ. When you're sitting with zalimeen and you're forced to be there, if you're sitting with munafiqeen and you're compelled to be in that gathering, check your heart and always make sure that your heart renounces what they do. This is a level of nahi anil munkar that is wajib aini. Al-inkar al-qalbi. It's mandatory. Tell yourself that you denounce, you refuse this. This is how you protect the purity of your heart. And then what does the Imam say? He says, وَجْهَرْ بِتَعْظِيمِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. When you're in that gathering, proclaim the greatness of Allah out loud. Do tasbih out loud. Mention Allah's name out loud. Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah, Tabarakallah. Glorify Allah out loud. Why? لِتُسْمِعَهُمْ. So that they can hear you. Let them hear the name of Allah. Let them hear the name of God. Why? فَإِنَّهُمْ يَهَابُوكَ وَتُكْفَى شَرُّهُمْ. When you're with corrupt people, if you mention the name of Allah out loud, Allah will put fear in their hearts. They'll be afraid of you. Yahabuk. They'll be careful around you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He'll give you this protective aura. Yahabuk, and Allah will protect you from their evil. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he gives us this valuable advice on how to think, what to say, what to feel when we are in the presence of munafiqeen. And I'll end with this narration from Al-Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq salawatullahi alayhi. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, ثلاثة لا يجهل حقهم إلا منافق معروف بالنفاق. There are three types of people whose rights are not respected by the munafiq. Only a munafiq is ignorant of the rights of these three. Who are these three groups? ذو الشيبة في الإسلام. ذو الشيبة في الإسلام means someone who has gray hair, who has spent a lifetime practicing Islam. You know, in Islam, in our tradition, we have immense respect for someone who has grown old in the service of God and His Messenger. There's a type of spiritual seniority. They've done decades of ibadah, decades of salah and siyam. That service, you know, just like when someone serves in an army, in a government, there's a certain level of respect that that country shows to someone who has spent decades in service. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if there's a mu'min who has been worshiping Him for a long time, so much so that they have gray hairs in their beard, or they have gray hairs on their body because of how old they've become in the service of God, such a person should be respected. But a munafiq doesn't respect the shaybati fil Islam. The second person that the Munafiq does not respect and he does not observe the right of is وَحَامِلَ الْقُرْآنِ. Hamil al-Quran is a carrier of the Quran, not just a reciter of the Quran. A carrier of the Quran is someone who knows the Quran, who is familiar with the Quran, and who embodies the teachings of the Quran. Only a Munafiq undermines such a person. Only a Munafiq neglects the right of such a person. And then finally the Imam says, وَالْإِمَامُ الْعَادِلِ. And a just Imam. A just Imam is not respected and honored by the Munafiq. And this makes you think that if Imam al-Sadiq says, if someone is old, an old mu'min, if someone is an old mu'min, a sign of nifaq is that that person doesn't respect that old mu'min. And this is an ordinary mu'min. A sign of hypocrisy is to disrespect and undervalue an old believer. A sign of nifaq is to undermine and disrespect a carrier of the Quran. A sign of nifaq is to disrespect a just leader. How about if that gray beard is the beard of Amir al-Mu'mineen? How about if that carrier of the Quran is not just a carrier of the Quran? Imagine that person is the embodiment of the Quran itself, al-Quran al-Natiq. When we speak about al-Imam al-Adil, who is more adil than Amir al-Mu'mineen? That's why last night we said that the Prophet, he gave us a very accurate indicator of nifaq. And that is the one who harbors enmity towards Amir al-Mu'mineen. No matter how much you try to conceal your nifaq, no matter how good you are at covering your tracks, the best litmus test is your relationship to the commander of the faithful, Amir al-Mu'mineen. And that's why after the death of the Prophet, even people like Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, he says, we used to be able to easily identify the mu'min from the munafiq. After the death of the Prophet, we simply see what is this person's relationship to Amir al-Mu'mineen. And that's why in these nights of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, she was the first defender of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The first advocate for the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And she paid the ultimate price for this loyalty. And we're not talking about loyalty to a husband. This is loyalty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. This is loyalty to the legacy of the Prophet. Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, after her home was ambushed, after her house was desecrated by the Munafiqeen after the death of the Prophet, Fatima alayhi salam, she knew that her days were numbered. It was known that Fatima Zahra would be the first one to be reunited with Rasulullah. It is said that when the Prophet was on his deathbed, it was Fatima alayhi salam who was sitting beside him. This is where every daughter should be when her father is on his deathbed. She was sitting beside her father, and Rasulullah, his condition was deteriorating. The Prophet, he would go in and out of consciousness. And Fatima Zahra, imagine how attached she was to the Prophet. She was only 18 years old, the teenage daughter of the Prophet. She would look at him, and you can imagine what she felt when the Prophet would go unconscious. When she saw the Prophet in that condition, she started to cry. She started to weep bitterly. When the Prophet would regain consciousness, he would see Fatima alayhi salam there, and he would whisper into her ear, and she would cry even more. And then after a short while, he would whisper something else into her ear, and then a smile appeared on the lips of Sayeda Fatima. And she was later asked, Ya Sayyidat al-Nisa, what happened on that day when you were sitting beside your father? He whispered something into your ear that made you weep so bitterly. What did he tell you? She said that he told me, Oh Fatima, I will not survive this. That soon I'm going to leave this world. And she said that when the gravity of that reality settled in my heart, I couldn't hold back my tears. That we are really farewelling the Messenger of Allah. So what did he tell you that made you smile, O Fatima? She said that he told me that you are the first one who will join me. You're the first one who's going to see me. You're not going to remain long after me. And I smiled because I didn't want to continue living for too long. She saw that as a glad tiding. In her last days, she calls upon Amir al-Mu'mineen. She says, Ya ibn al-Am, Amir al-Mu'mineen was her husband, her cousin. She knew him very well. And they had a very beautiful, blessed marital life. They built the best family. And we are benefiting and we're reaping the fruits of that marriage even until today. She says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, there is something in my heart that I want to share with you. You know that I'm not going to stay for here forever. I'm approaching my end and I have a wasiyah that I want to give to you. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he says, O daughter of Rasulullah, of course. Tell me whatever your wasiyah is and I will execute exactly what you wish. When Fatima alayhi salam told him that I'm approaching my end, it is said that they cried together. You can imagine how painful that moment was. That Ali and Fatima, they're sharing these final days together and they're crying together. Until Fatima alayhi salam, she says, Ya ibn al-Am, ma ahidtani kadhiba wala khair. Oh Ali, have I not been a good wife to you? Ma ahidtani kadhiba wala khain. Oh Ali, I have never lied. I have never betrayed. وَلَا خَالَفْتُكَ مُنْذُ عَاشَرْتَنِي. And I have never disobeyed you from the moment that we got married. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he says, Ya bint Rasulillah, أنت أعلم وأبر وأتقى من أن أوبخك بمخالفتي. That, oh Fatima, you are too noble, you are too pious for me to ever rebuke you. You are the best wife. What is your wasiyah? And Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he says to her, يعز علي فقدك ومفارقتك. That, oh Fatima, it's not easy for me to lose someone like you. He says, والله لقد جددت علي مصيبة رسول الله. Oh Fatima, losing you is renewing the tragedy of losing Rasulullah. That losing you is just repeating the agony that I felt when Rasulullah left this world. Fatima alayhi salam, she says, Ya ibn al-Am, I have some requests. The first request is, Oh Ali, I want you to marry after me. because a man cannot be without a wife. And she mentions that I want you to marry this lady because she is very affectionate with Hassan and Hussein. I want them to have someone to look after them. She mentions her children. And she says, number 2, O Ali, I do not want any of my oppressors to attend my janazah. I don't want any of them to come to my funeral. I don't want any one of them to come pray over me. وادفني ليلا إذا هدأت الأصوات ونامت العيون. And I want you to bury me at night, O Ali. وادفني في الليل إذا هدأت الأصوات ونامت العيون. I want you to bury me at night. وعفي موضع قبري. And I want you to conceal the location of my grave. وتعهد قبري بتلاوة القرآن. And after you bury me, O Ali, I want you to come to my grave. And I want you to recite the Quran. I want you to recite Surah Yasin, Surah Safat. فإن الميت يأنس إذا قرئ عنده القرآن. Because the dead, the deceased, feels comfort when the Quran is recited. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he says, I will execute the wasiyah as you wish. On the last day of the life of Sayeda Fatima, she calls upon Hassan and Hussein. She bathes them. She spends an intimate day with them. She clothes them. This is the last time that she's going to spend with Hassan and Hussein. And after she washes them, she says to them, اخرجا خلف أبيكما علي للمسجد. She tells them, go follow your father Ali to the masjid. They go, they follow Amir al-Mu'mineen. Fatima Zahra is now at home. Who is with her? Asma is with her. She came to look after Fatima Zahra. Fatima Zahra, she says, Ya Asma, I have not performed my nawafil. I haven't performed my extra recommended prayers. I'm going to go into my room to do my nawafil. If you hear my recitation, know that I'm fine. But if you suddenly hear a silence, call upon me. If I answer you, know that I am fine, I'm okay. But if you call upon me and I don't respond, know that I have been reunited with my father. She goes into her hujra, she goes into her room, she's reciting her salah. Asma, she says, I could hear the recitation of Fatima. I could hear her beautiful tilawah. Her recitation was beautiful, so angelic. Until suddenly the recitation stopped. I called out, Ya Zahra, ma ajabt. I called out to her, Ya Zahra, there was no answer. Ya Sayyidat al-Nisa, ma ajabt. There was no answer once again. I called out again, Ya al-Hasan wal-Husayn. There was no answer. She says, I went into the room and I saw the lifeless body of Fatima. Fatima had returned to her Lord at that very moment. Hassan and Hussein, they returned to the house. The two young boys, the grandsons of Rasulullah. The moment, Asma says, the moment they entered, they said salam. The first question they asked me, they said, Ya Asma, ayna ummuna Fatima? They said, where is our mother Fatima, O Asma? She said, I did not want to break the news to them, so I ignored their question. I said to them, sit down, O Hassan and Hussein, let me prepare some food for you. They sit down. She goes and prepares food to them. She brings the food. She says to them, Kula ya nura aynay Rasulillah. Eat, O the beloveds of Rasulullah. Asma says, when I served them the food, Hassan looked at Hussein and Hussein looked at Hassan. And then they both looked at me and they said, Ya Asma, من أين علمت أننا نأكل وأمنا فاطمة ليست معنا? When have you ever seen us, O Asma? When have we ever had a meal without our mother Fatima? فأحس قلب الحسين بالشر. At that moment, Imam al-Hussein, the young Hussein, he could sense that there was something wrong. They both ran into the room of their mother and they saw the deceased body of their mother. Imagine the scene. Imam al-Hassan, he throws himself on the chest of his mother. And al-Hussein alayhi salam, he's clinging to the feet of Fatima. He's kissing the feet of his mother. He's crying out, Ya Ummah, kallimini ana azizuk al-Hussein. Oh my mother Fatima, speak to me. I am your beloved Hussein. Al-Hassan alayhi salam, he cries out, Ya Ummah, كلميني قبل خروج روحي من بدني. The boys, they stand up. Now they have to break the news to who? They have to go break the news to their father, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. They rush to the masjid. They enter the masjid crying. They cry out, Ya Abana, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, laqad matat ummuna Fatima, rahim Allah man nada wa Fatimata. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, the moment he hears that Fatima has left this world, the narrations say that Amir al-Mu'mineen fainted. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he fell unconscious. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he comes to the home and now he has to wash the body of Fatima. He has to wash the blessed body of a Sayeda Zahra. The narrations say that as he's preparing the body for the funeral, he's washing the body with the assistance of some of the women of Bani Hashim. He's washing. Suddenly Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he steps away from the body. He goes and he sits in one of the corners of the room. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam begins weeping. They say to him, Ya Abul Hassan, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, we're washing the body of Fatima. We're doing ghusl al-mayyit. Why did you stop? Why are you crying? He says that when I was washing the body of Fatima, my hand touched the rib of Zahra. My hand touched the broken rib. By Allah, she did not tell me that her rib was broken. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-ali al-azim. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our deeds, to forgive us our transgressions. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to honor us with the shafa'ah of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam on the day of Qiyamah, on the day of judgment. يوم لا ينفع مال ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم وآخر دعوانا إن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.